For those people who don't know what FOMO stands for, it's on the handout. FOMO, F, fear, O, of, M, missing, O, out. FOMO, fear of missing out. So today we are going to be talking about Pesach Sheini and the fear of missing out. Pesach Sheini falls out this year on, every year it falls out on Yud Dalet Nisan, and it falls out this year on Monday, the 26th, so Sunday night / Monday this week coming up. Pesach Sheini is known as Pesach Koton or Pesach Ze'ira, basically like mini Pesach. Wait a minute, somebody else has come in the room. Oh, it's going to be annoying. You've got to remind me every so often to check. I hope I don't let me make people sit in the waiting room for a long time. Okay. But please keep yourself muted, but everyone feel free to unmute yourself. I'm happy for people to ask questions, make comments, interact. It's absolutely fine. Basically, what is Pesach Sheini? Pesach Sheini was an opportunity for people who were not able to offer up the Korban Pesach in the month of Nisan, at the time when there was a Beis HaMikdash or a Mishkan. They had a second opportunity 1 month later to offer up the Korban Pesach. There were slightly different rules. You didn't have to get rid of the chometz, which is amazing, but you had to eat matzah, and you had to bring a korban, and you had to eat it with maror. And I'm sorry I keep looking that way, but that's the only way I can see if people are waiting to come in, and I don't want to make people wait longer than necessary. Who would this apply to? So there could be lots of reasons why this would apply to somebody, but classically the Gemara gives examples of someone, a boy who was below the age of bar mitzvah, and he's born on Chol HaMoed Pesach, therefore he has no obligation to offer up the Korban Pesach. So does he then have to offer up the Korban Pesach for Pesach Sheini? Or perhaps somebody who became Jewish, who wasn't Jewish before Pesach, and then became Jewish on Pesach. Or, as we'll see in the Torah, people who had a very valid reason why they were not able to offer up the Korban Pesach actually on Pesach itself. The law is given in a very strange way, and we read about it in Parshas Bahaloscha, in Bamidbar, Perek Tes. Now, it starts off at the beginning of the Perek, but we're going to pick up the story in Posuk Vov. So source 1 in your sheet. Vayehi anashim asher hayu tmeim lenefesh odom. And there were certain men who had become unclean, tome, impure, for some reason. We're going to see later who those people could be, like in part 2 of the share. We'll see who those people were. V'lo yochlu la'asos ha'pesach bayom hahu. And they were not able to do the Pesach sacrifice, the Paschal, to offer up the Paschal lamb on that day. And we'll see what significance about on that day is the following day, perhaps they could have done. Vayikrivu livnei Moshe, and they, just one second. Vayikrivu livnei Moshe, and they came towards Moshe v'lifnei Aaron bayom hahu.
Vayikrivu.
They came to Moshe and Aaron and said, what are we going to do about this? Vayomru ha'anashim ha'hema elov. And those men said to Moshe, Anachnu tmeim lenefesh odom. We are unclean. We have somehow been contaminated by a corpse, somebody who's dead. Loma nigora. Why should we miss out? So this is the topic today. Why should we miss out? We don't want to be the ones to miss out. Here we are. We've got an opportunity to do a mitzvah, and for some reason we have to miss out. We don't want to miss out. We've got a valid reason why we can't do the mitzvah, but we know how important mitzvahs are, so we do not want to miss out. Nevilti hakriv es korban Hashem b'mo'ado. Why should we miss out from bringing the korban of Hashem in its right time, in the month of Nisan, b'soch b'nei Israel, and be part of the bigger picture, to be part of the whole of the congregation of Israel? What is Moshe's response? Now, this is one of the 5 times that Moshe did not know how to respond, and he had to ask Hashem. Pasuk Ches. Vayoma alehem Moshe. Moshe said to them, Imdu, wait here a second, guys. Wait here, just stand there. Ve'eshma'a ma yitzaveh Hashem lachem. That I will hear what Hashem will command concerning you. Now, I think this is the most remarkable pasuk, that Moshe had the confidence that he could say, just 1 minute, let me just do my hot dial to Hashem, and I'm going to get back to you with an answer. I think that is just incredible and remarkable. Amazing that Moshe had this amazing relationship with Hashem, that he was certain that he would get a reply from Hashem. Not only that, he said, Imdu, wait here, like literally just stand outside my office, I'll make a quick phone call, I'll get back to you. As a big diversion, we'll just quickly mention the 5 things that Moshe forgot. And the Vilna Gaon says the way to remember the 5 things that Moshe either forgot or he didn't know. There are other examples. For example, he didn't know how to make the menorah, and he didn't know how to do the Chodesh, but there are 5 things where Moshe basically had to ask Hashem to find out exactly how to deal with the situation. And they are the 5 final letters, which produce the acronym Menatzpach. Mem for Makoshesh Eitzim, the person who gathered sticks on Shabbos. Nun for No Kev Shem Hashem. There was the person, it's in the parasha of Emor, not this week, next week, where there's a person who, so to speak, blessed the name of Hashem because he was taken out the camp, which basically means he cursed it, but we don't say those 2 words together. Benos Salofchad, that Sadi is Salofchad's daughters. He didn't know how to deal with their inheritance, their call for asking for a portion of the land of Israel when Salofchad had no sons. Pei for Pesach Sheini, and Chaf is for Cosby. So in the story, we're not going to go into this in any detail, but the story of Pinchas and Cosby Basor and Zimri ben Salu, where Pinchas came along, Moshe didn't know what to do, and Pinchas came along and drove a spear between them and said, that's the right, that's the halacha, what to do at the time in that awful instance. So that's a very quick side point. Menatzpach, Mem, Nun, Sadi, Pei, Chaf, the final letters. The Vilna Gaon realized that you could think of it like that. Amazing, and he's a genius. Okay, Posuk Tes. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe Lema, and Hashem replies to Moshe and he says, Daber el Bnei Israel Lema, speak to the children of Israel, saying, Ish ki yeh tomei lenefesh, o baderech rechov lachem, o ledorosechem, va'asa Pesach laHashem. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, if any man amongst you or your generations shall be unclean, shall be tomei for a reason of a dead body, or o b'derech rocha, or is somewhere far away, he shall keep Pesach laHashem. When will that be? Pasuk Yud Aleph. B'chodesh Hasheni, in the 2nd month, Ba'arba Asar Yom, that means in the month of Iyar as opposed to the month of Nisan when we're supposed to offer up the Korban Pesach. Bein ha'arbaim ya'asu oso. So he should offer up the Korban Pesach at twilight of the 14th. And then we have a sentence that everybody should be familiar with because it's from the Haggadah when we do the korech, the Hillel sandwich. Al matzos umarorim yochluhu. You shall eat the Korban Pesach with matzah and mora, which is why we have korech, where we have matzah and mora. I'm sorry? Can I ask you to mute yourself?
Okay.
Right, you're welcome to ask me questions, but if you're talking to somebody else, it disturbs me. But if you want to ask me a question, by all means. Just going back to Pasuk Yud, it says Daber el Bnei Israel Lemar ish, that the rules of Korban, the Pesach Sheini, only apply to individuals. If for some reason the whole community is tomei, then we do not postpone Pesach to Pesach Sheini. It's everybody keeps Pesach in the right time. This is only for individuals who are in a specific situation where they couldn't keep Pesach at the right time. So then the Psukim carry on with a few more details about what has to be done. So none of the Korban Pesach Sheini can be left over to the morning. You cannot break any bones. These are all similar to the rules of when the Korban Pesach was offered up. But if anybody is, just 1 second, somebody is coming back in. But v'ha'ish ashehu tahar pasuk yud gimel u'v'derech lo hayach v'chadal la'asos ha'pesach. Anyone who could have kept the Korban Pesach in the right time but did not, v'nichrasaha nefesh hahi, and that soul shall be cut off from its people. Ki Korban Hashem lo hikriv b'ma'ado, because that person did not offer up the Korban Pesach in the right time, and they didn't have, in inverted commas, a valid reason why they didn't do it. Chet'o yis'or ha'ish hahu, that man shall bear his sin. So basically, a person has to have a very, very good reason why they didn't offer up the Korban Pesach on the time. There are only two mitzvahs, I say, that a person, if they didn't do it, the punishment will be kores, spiritual cutting off, and that is bris milah and Korban Pesach. Okay, other things which you get kores for is things that you did, not that you didn't do. Because if you didn't do the Korban Pesach, or if a person didn't have a bris milah or didn't give their son a bris milah, those two are the only two exceptions. And we will see later on today how those two subjects, Korban Pesach and bris milah, are very closely linked. If a stranger, Posuk Yud Daled, if a stranger shall sojourn among you, and he'll keep Pesach Hashem according to the statutes of Pesach, according to its laws, both for the stranger and for the Ezra Haaretz. And then that's like the end. There's like a little break there's like a little patucha. So we're on to the next subject in the Torah. Carries on with the next subject. So I'm just going to pause there in case anybody would like to say anything or ask me anything if it wasn't clear. If it wasn't clear for you, the odds are I didn't explain it carefully enough, and so maybe somebody else would like it to be clarified. So don't be shy if you didn't understand. Okay, so I'd like to move on to the next part of this share, which is talking about when this story took place. So for that, you need to look at source 2, and the beginning of Perek Tes, just one second. The beginning of Perek Tes starts off like this. It's not often this happens in the Torah, but there are times when this happens, where the Torah literally gives a time and a place, like a date stamp, to say when this story took place. And this story took place, Perek Tes, Posuk Aleph, source 2 on your sheets. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai, Bashona Hashenis, it's the second year, Letzetzom me'eretz Mitzrayim. So it's 1 year after they left the land of Egypt, B'chodesh harishon leimar. This story takes place in the month of Nisan, in the year 2449. So it was Bnei Israel came out of Egypt, they have Matan Torah, and now we're coming up almost the anniversary of going out of Egypt. Sometime in Nisan, this story takes place. Vaya'asu Bnei Israel es haPasach b'moado. Let the Bnei Israel keep the Pesach sacrifice in its correct time, which we know is the 14th of Nisan. And then we have carries on in Posuk 6, which talks about Pesach Sheini. What is so interesting about this, if we look at source 3, the book of Bamidbar opens up also with a time, date, and stamp. And Rashi finds this very troubling because the book of Bamidbar opens up with a time, date, and stamp, which is after the Perek Tes. So why should Perek Aleph open up with a time stamp, which is after the one in Perek Tes? Let me just read Psukim, and then I'll just make sure everyone understood what I said. Source 3, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai. This is the first verse of the book of Bamidbar. Ba'ohel Moed, be'echad lachodesh hasheni, be'echad lachodesh hasheni. This story took place on the first day of the month of Iyar. So here we have Perek Aleph opens up the first of Iyar, and Perek Tes opens up the beginning of Nisan. We don't know exactly what date in Nisan, but sometime before the middle of Nisan. Does everyone understand the question? Okay, here's the question in Rashi's words, source 4. B'chodesh harishon. Rashi's asking, why does Perek Tes start off with the words with the 9th month? Parsha shebarosh hasefer lo ne'emra ad Iyar. The book of Bamidbar opens up with chapter 1. It's Iyar. We know the time, date, and stamp. Lomadta, you've already learned, she'ein seder mukdam u'mu'uchar b'Torah. The word mukdam means earlier, and the word mu'uchar means later. So Translating that literally, there is no such thing as earlier or later in the Torah. Some people translate that as there's no such thing as chronological order in the Torah. I would like to translate that differently. The Torah does follow time, but sometimes there's another reason which supersedes time, that the Torah changes the date and time of things. So usually the Torah does follow quite a chronological order of events, but there's sometimes an overarching reason why the Torah deviates from the natural time clock of time as we know it. Does everyone understand what I just said? Yeah? Anyone wants to ask me, stop me, by all means, stop me whenever you want. Why on this occasion do we deviate from the natural time?
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you...
Let's just see if I can mute those people. 1 second. Why can't I hear that? Everybody's out here. Okay. Rashi answers, Mipnei shehu ganuson shel Yisrael. It's because it was very embarrassing for Bnei Yisrael. Shekol arba'im shana shehoyu Yisrael bamidbar lo hikrivu elo Pesach ze bilvad. The reason that the book of Bamidbar does not open up with the story of offering up the Korban Pesach and Pesach Sheini is because that was the only time in the 40 years that Bnei Israel were in the wilderness that they offered up the Korban Pesach. And that is embarrassing for Bnei Israel. Is it embarrassing for Bnei Israel? Were they supposed to offer up the Korban Pesach? Why did they not bring the Korban Pesach for the other 38 years in the desert? Were they obligated to offer up the Korban Pesach whilst they were in the desert? Let's look at the command for the Korban Pesach initially. And for that, we have to look in Parshas Bo, which is like at the time when the Bnei Israel were about to leave Egypt, and the Korban Pesach. In Shemos Yud Beis Pasuk Kaf Hey, source 5 on your sheet. V'haya ki sovou el ha'oretz, and it shall be when you come to the land. Asher yitain Hashem lachem, ka'asher diber, ushamartem es ha'avoda hazos. And you shall keep this commandment, the commandment of offering up the Korban Pesach. Rashi makes a comment on that verse. V'haya ki sovou el ha'oretz, and it should be when you come to the land. Talah ha'kosuv avoda zu b'vi osom la'oretz. The words are, it shall be when you come to the land. So according to Rashi, it was not supposed to be during the time when the people were in the wilderness that they had to offer up the Korban Pesach. They only had to do it. It was a mitzvah which was dependent on coming to the land of Israel. And he carries on, V'lo nischayvu bamidbar ela Pesach echad she'osu b'shana hashenus al pi hadibur. Just 1 second. 1 second. I'm so sorry about this. I'm sorry, I'm just got to be, I don't know why they made this, but I have to check who's coming in. That the Bnei Israel did not actually have an obligation to keep the Korban Pesach, except when they came to the land of Israel. Except for the one time, the first year when they came out of Egypt, when they did have to keep the Korban Pesach, which we read about in the first pasuk of chapter 9. I hope I haven't confused people. If there's anybody who wants to stop and ask me to repeat anything, by all means, let me know. Okay, so Bnei Israel, it's embarrassing they didn't keep the Korban Pesach the whole time they were in the land, they were in the desert, but Rashi's telling us they had no obligation except for the first year. So why is it embarrassing? Good question. The thing is that all the time when the Bnei Israel were in the desert, the men did not, the people who were, the children who were born, and anyone who didn't have bris milah before they offered up Korban Pesach in Egypt did not have a bris milah. Because we know that because in the book of Yoshua in Perek Hay, if you want to look it up, it's Psukim Daled and Hay and onwards, the whole Jewish population, all the men had like a national circumcision. A person is not obligated to bring the Korban Pesach if they don't have bris milah. A man is not obligated to offer up the Korban Pesach if they haven't had bris milah. And the Ramban, Nachmanides, goes so far as to say, if a father has not given their son a bris milah, they cannot offer up the Korban Pesach. Question is, why were they not circumcised in the wilderness? Why did they not do bris milah in the desert? For that we have to look at the Gemara, the Talmud Bavli Yevamos, Ayin Aleph and Ayin Beis, which is source 7 in your sheet. And there are a few reasons why the Bnei Israel did not give bris milah in the desert. I will just caveat that with that. Some people say the Leviim gave their sons bris milah, which is like, why did they only care about their own sons and not convince the rest of Bnei Israel, which is a separate issue well beyond the remit of the shir. Source 7. Uba midbar, my tama lelo mahul. What is the reason that they did not give bris milah in the desert? Ibois ema mishum chusha da'orcha. You may suggest it's because they were exhausted from the journey. Okay, what does that mean? They didn't actually know when they would have to travel or when they wouldn't have to travel, because they got to Bnei Israel, arrived at Har Sinai at the beginning of Sivan, the 1st of Sivan. So they left Egypt. 7 weeks later, 1 week later, they crossed the Yam Suf. And 6 weeks after that, 5 weeks after that, they arrived at Har Sinai. And they were still at Har Sinai almost a whole year later, because they didn't move until Kaf Iyar. They didn't move for almost a year. So they were there for a whole year. The problem is they didn't know if they'd have to be on the move. So they didn't know if their children would have the opportunity to recuperate after having had bris milah. That's one opinion. Ve'ibois ema mishum delo noshiv lahu ruach safonis. You might prefer to say it's because the north wind didn't blow for them. How does that make it clearer? I don't know. We'll have to look and see what Rashi says. Kol osa is the Tanya. It's taught in the Brisa. Kol osan arba'im shana shehoyu Yisrael bamidbar lo noshva lahem ruach safonis. All the 40 years the Bnei Israel were in the desert, the northern wind did not blow. Rashi says, what's the significance of the northern wind? And he says that it disperses the cloud and it allows the sun to shine through to help with the healing process. So please Hashem, send us the north wind to let the sun shine through here. We'll be very, very happy. I find this quite troubling because Bnei Israel are blamed for not offering up Korban Pesach. They're blamed because they didn't give their children bris milah. But the two reasons that the Talmud brings, it's not really their fault. How could they do anything about it? They didn't know when they were going to have to travel or not travel. And they didn't know how it was going to rain or not rain, whether Hashem made the rain and the clouds come or go. So how is it the Bnei Israel's fault? Good question. Yeah, good. The thing is, Bnei Israel should have had a fast track pass to get to Eretz Israel. What held them back? What was the reason we were in the wilderness for 40 years? Because we listened to the words of the Meraglim, the spies, and we listened to the Lashon Hara in the land of Israel. And Hashem said to himself, you don't want to go in my land? Don't come in my land. I don't want you, I don't want your bris milah, and I don't want your Korban Pesach. There are opinions which say it's also because of the Egel HaZahov. So basically, we caused ourselves to be in the desert. It wasn't the original, so to speak, Hashem's original plan. Obviously, Hashem lives beyond time and space. But initially, if we wouldn't have fallen foul of the Meraglim and the Egel HaZahov, we would have gone straight into the land of Israel. So it's our own fault that we were in the midbar for 40 years. We had to develop our character and learn things and develop ourselves as a nation and as humans to get better. So it's our own fault that we were in the land of Israel. But because of that, we were not able to do bris milah. And we hear that there are some people, the Leviim, according to some opinions, Leviim did bris milah. But it's our own fault that we were in the desert for so long, and it's our own fault that we didn't do a bris milah, and it's our own fault, so to speak, that we didn't have the opportunity to offer up a Korban Pesach. Given that, there are loads of excuses why people had the excuse not to offer up the Korban Pesach all the time they were in the midbar, whether it's the weather or whether it's the bris milah or whatever it is, how incredible is it that the first year after Bnei Israel came out of Egypt, there were some individuals who were so unhappy that they were unable to offer up the Korban Pesach. And even though perhaps they were not obligated, except for the first year, that they nevertheless felt, why should we miss out? We have FOMO. We don't want to miss out on an opportunity to do a mitzvah. These people realized the value of a mitzvah, even if they had a very good excuse why they didn't do it, and they wanted to have the opportunity to do the mitzvah. And they said to Moshe, please help us. We don't want to miss out on a mitzvah. Give us another chance. Who were these people? Before I talk about who are these people, if anybody's got any questions or comments to make, please unmute yourself. Oops. I could only assume that I was completely clear. That's great. So who were these people? Now, the Gemara, in Gemara Sukkah, Kaf Hey Amud Beis, gives us three possible solutions to who these people were. And I'd like to say, when the Gemara gives three possible solutions, I think it means that none of the reasons are satisfactory, and perhaps we don't know who these people are, and perhaps it doesn't actually matter who these people are. What's more important is, what can we learn from these people? So let's hear what the Gemara says. Source 8 on your sheet. Osom anoshim mihayu. Who were these people? Who were these men who complained about missing out on the opportunity to do the mitzvah? One opinion is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Nose arono shel Yosef hayu. They were the people who were looking after the remains of Yosef. When Moshe left Egypt, he promised Yosef, Yosef made the Bnei Israel promise that he would take his bones with him. And the people who were sort of looking after his bones were Tome. Not such a satisfactory solution to the problem. We'll find out in a minute why. Rabbi Akiva's got a different opinion, and he says it could be Mishael ve'el Tzafon hayu. It could be Mishael and El Tzafon. They were cousins, and they were looking after Shehayu Asukim b'Nodov v'Avihu. They were looking after Nodov and Avihu, who died on the 1st of Nisan that year. And this story, they obviously couldn't offer up the Korban Pesach because it was 14 days later. They were but Rabbi, let me see who it is. Rabbi Yitzchok's not happy with either of those two answers, and he says, Imno say arono shel Yosef hayu. If they were the people who were holding Yosef's bones, kvar hayu yochlin litaher. They already had ample opportunity to purify themselves. Because if the Mishkan was dedicated on the 1st of Nisan, this is at least 14 days later, the Para Aduma was dealt with on the first day. They had 7 days to purify themselves, in which case they should have been Tahar at that time. And the same applies if you talk about Im Mishal ve'el Safon hayu, Yochlin hayu litaher, they could have purified themselves. So what suggestion does Rabbi Yitzchok give us? And he says the following: Ela oskim b'Mace Mitzvah hayu. These people were dealing with a Mace Mitzvah. Now, Mace Mitzvah it literally translates as the mitzvah of the dead, which generally refers to an abandoned corpse. So if a dead body is found, so to speak, in the middle of nowhere, every single person has the obligation to bury that dead body, including the Kohen Gadol. But in this context, I think it means somebody, well, not me, the Mefarshim tell us, it means someone who was busy with burying a person who died. And he says, Shechol Shavi'i Shelahem Liyos Be'erev Pesach. That person would have been Tahar at the end of 7 days. So their relative, or the person they found, possibly died on the 7th of Nisan, and he could have, so to speak, become Tahar on the 14th at night / the 15th. But according to the rules of eating the Korban Pesach, is if you're not Tahar at the time when you shech the Korban Pesach, you cannot eat the Korban Pesach the following day. It's just a technicality, don't worry about it. So what Rabbi Yitzchok is suggesting, is Rabbi Yitzchok suggesting is that somebody was looking after someone who died, not randomly in the desert, but not like a famous person like Yosef's bones or Mishael and El Safon, who are looking after the bodies of Nadav and Avihu, because he's not satisfied. He says, time-wise, Bnei Israel had been there for such a long time, we can't blame it on those people, which is why I'm saying, does it really matter who these people were? They had a valid reason. They were looking after a dead body, and that is why they were not tahar. So just three different opinions. There are different opinions as to whether or not anyone actually died in the wilderness, because when there were countings in the wilderness, when they made census, sometimes the first and second had exactly the same amount of people. So according to, I think it's Rashi says nobody died in the desert, but I can't understand how that is, because then it means nobody was born. But Ibn Ezra will reach the age of 20. Ibn Ezra said people died. That's just what happened in the desert. People died all the time. The Torah Tanima says we don't actually care who these people were. The Torah doesn't name them. We don't need to know. But what we do need to know is, what can we learn from these people? These people had excuse after excuse, whoever they were, why they didn't need to offer up the Korban Pesach, but yet they teach us a lesson. They teach us a lesson in how to behave. Look at how they behaved. They had every excuse in the book why they didn't need to offer up the Korban Pesach in the right time. And they could have just said, look, we had a reason. We've got an excuse. But they said, no, even though we've got an excuse, we realize the value of a mitzvah and we don't want to miss out. Don't let us miss out on the mitzvah. And the Gemara carries on, source 9, that it's like a ma'amar chazal, ha'osef b'mitzvah potor min ha'mitzvah. A person who's engaged in a mitzvah is exempt from performing another mitzvah. These people had an obligation. They were burying a dead body. They were looking after Yosef's bones. They were looking after Nadav and Avihu's bones. So they didn't actually have the obligation of the Korban Pesach because they were dealing with another mitzvah. And that's a concept that, for example, God forbid, when a person loses someone they have to sit shiva for, they have no obligation to keep any mitzvahs. They don't have to make brachas. They don't have to anything. They've got no obligation to keep mitzvahs until they've done the mitzvah that is very, very important for them at that time, and that is to bury the person in their family who's just passed away. So their obligation for all the other mitzvahs is suspended until they've done, in inverted commas, the most urgent mitzvah. The people who came to Moshe, just one second, sorry. The people who came to Moshe who wanted to offer up the Korban Pesach, they were upset that they missed out and they didn't have a chance to have the opportunity to offer up a Korban Pesach. They didn't allow something to disrupt them, and they were not willing to miss out on an opportunity. They realized the value of a mitzvah. And I would like to bring this into our lives today, because we're not offering up a Korban Pesach. Obviously, we've got Zecher, the Korban Pesach in the all Seder night and Pesach, everything still like that. But what about Pesach Sheini? What do we do on Pesach Sheini? Some people have got the minhag to eat matzah. There's also a minhag not to give hespedim and not to say tachana. But how is Pesach Sheini relevant to our lives? And I would like to suggest the people who were involved in the story of Pesach Sheini, who came to Moshe and said, we do not want to miss out. We had an opportunity and we didn't have that. We had an opportunity to do a mitzvah and we lost that opportunity because it wasn't our fault. What things happen to us in our own lives where we have an opportunity to do something and something gets in our way? So let's say, for example, we decide, you know what? I'm going to go to shul. Rabbi Bixen Spanner, the shul's opening up. There's a ladies' shir next week. I'm going to go to shul. So there might be things that prevent us. Just before we're going out the house, the doorbell rings, someone needs our help. There might be something else. We might have to drive there. I know a lot of us live within walking distance, but we might have to drive there and there might be a traffic jam. Maybe your car doesn't start. Maybe you leave your glasses at home. There's lots of reasons, lots of things happen. Maybe your child or your grandchild phones you and says, Mom, I need you, this and that and the other, or one of your friends needs you. There might be an excuse, but Are you going to let those excuses get in your way? Are you going to say to yourself, well, I've got an excuse and this happened and that happened? Or are you going to say to yourself, I'm still going to do that? Okay. What about if somebody asks you for your help and they say, can you help me do this? And you're like, I don't mind helping you as long as I blah, blah, blah. And then something comes up and then something else comes up. Or do we say to ourselves, I'm still, even with whatever stumbling blocks got in my way to prevent me from doing the mitzvah, even if they're all valid excuses and real reasons, am I going to say to myself, well, this happened and that happened? Or am I going to say to myself, no, whatever happens, nothing's going to stand in my way? This time last year, my nephew wanted to go to draft in the Israeli army. He's English. He went to a yeshiva and he wanted to draft in the army. There were different problems because of Corona. He had to come home before he drafted in the army, and he got stuck in England for a month because he couldn't leave because of Corona. There weren't so many flights. He had to fill in paperwork. You have no idea. He went 7 or 8 times to the airport. His parents took him to try and get a flight. And I was like, this isn't meant to be. Hashem's sending you a message. And he's like, no, I'm going in the army. Doesn't matter. Whatever's disrupting me, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to do this. They filled out paperwork. They went to the airport. They went to offices. They got whatever they could possibly do in order to help him get to the army. He had to quarantine for 2 weeks alone by himself in a flat. He had to spend Seder night on his own. And he went all through all those things because he felt there was a tremendous value in serving in the army. And I remember at the time, every day was, is he going? Is he not going? Is he okay? Is he okay? He was in isolation, but he felt focused on that end goal of, I know I'm doing the right thing and I want to serve in the army and nothing is going to stop me. Whatever obstacles went in his way, and take it from me, there were lots of obstacles. And I'm so proud of him. And he's already been in the army for a whole year. But when a person is passionate about something, nothing stands in their way. Whatever excuses, even if they're really valid excuses, they try their best and they don't let anything stand in their way. These people, in the story of Pesach Sheini, realized the value of a mitzvah. And even though they had an excuse, a real valid reason, and the rest of Bnei Israel had an excuse, they didn't have bris milah, whatever it is, they weren't supposed to, they weren't yet in the land of Israel. But for these people, the value of the mitzvah was so important, they chased it. They had FOMO. They had fear of missing out. They didn't want to miss out. And that's why they approached Moshe. And it's for that reason that they are credited, even though we don't know who they are, to be the people through whom this halacha came about. The same way that when the Bnei Selofchad brought about the halacha because they loved the land of Israel, the Bnei Selofchad, through them, they had the opportunity and the zechus that they got to teach through them. Moshe got to teach the halacha of what happens if women inherit. Going back to last year, I don't want to mention names, but there's a man in our shul who was very, very ill over Pesach, and he was in a coma, and he wasn't allowed to take any personal effects with him. The first thing when he woke up from his coma, he asked for his tefillin. And he knew that it was in the run up to Pesach, and he had no idea the date and the time that it was. He also asked whether it was Pesach that day. He didn't know if it was Pesach. He had no idea. He didn't know how long he was out for. Look at this man who was in hospital and going through terrible time where he didn't know if he was going to live or die. And the first thing he asks for is, what's his priority? What didn't he want to miss out on? The first opportunity that he was able to put on tefillin, didn't say, give me my mobile phone. He wanted to have his tefillin. I saw incredible footage last year of Eli Beer, who was the founder of Untitled Chapter, who was in a coma in America. He actually caught COVID. He was fundraising for Untitled Chapter, and he was not able to be home. He was in a coma over Pesach, and his family made a Seder table, and they sort of like put up a picture of him at their Seder table, representing that they would have loved him to have been there. And he actually, if you want to Google it, you can Google Eli Beer, Untitled Chapter Pesach Sheini, and he did like a mock Seder for him and his family to sort of relive the Pesach experience because he was not able to be with his family at the time of Pesach. That isn't necessary today, but I think it was the most very, very, very moving. And if anybody's got time, I would definitely recommend that. I just think for the people who were in the desert who had all the excuses that they didn't want to miss out on, I wonder what it is that we feel passionate, like my nephew, who was passionate about serving in the Israeli army, that nothing got in his way. What are we passionate about in our lives? So let's say some people are not so great at getting up early in the morning. But if they need to catch an early flight to Eilat, suddenly their tiredness in the morning, dissipates. When it comes to if they've got to go to like an early minyan, maybe not so good, but going on a flight, we can do that. What about young boys who don't really like getting up for shul, but if they can get tickets to go and see Wimbledon, then suddenly they've got the ability to get up early and they can camp outside all night, etc., etc. What is important to you? What's important enough that you want, that it's worth fighting for? What I said before is that the mitzvah of Pesach Sheini was brought about by these people who we don't even know who they are. But the Sifri, which is a Medrash in Bamidbar, source 10, Megalgalin Zechus al Yedei Zakai, that we bring about, that is a Zechus, a merit, by the means of someone who is worthy. These people were worthy. They did not want to give up on a mitzvah. They realized the importance of every single mitzvah. I'm going to leave out source 11 because I'd like to get to the story of Hillel Hazaki. And Hillel was very, very, very poor. And the Gemara in Yoma, Lamed Hey Omid Beis, tells the story of Hillel. What was Hillel passionate about? And Hillel was passionate about learning Torah. This is source 12 on your sheet. Omru Olav al Hillel Hazaki. The story is told about Hillel, the elder. Shebachol yom v'yom v'yoseh u'mishtaker batir rapoik, and he would spend every day learning and working, and he would earn like a tiny little coin, a tropic. Chetzu hayo nosein l'shomer beis hamedrash. Half his money, half his coin, he'd get like a £10 note. Let's say that would be his earnings for the day. Half of it he spent on being allowed into the learn in the Bet Midrash. The other half his money he would give for his parnasa, for his sustenance, and the parnasa of his household. Pa'am achas lo motza lehishtaker. One day there was a time where he didn't find employment and he didn't have any money. V'lo hinichu shomer beis hamedrash likones. And the guard, the security officer at the door of the Bet Midrash, did not let him in. He didn't know what to do. He didn't want to miss out to learn Torah. What did he do? In order to learn Torah, Ola v'nisla v'yoshav al pi aruba. He climbed up and he sat and he suspended himself and sat at the edge of the skylight in order to hear the words of the Torah. V'yoshav al pi aruba kedei sheyishma divrei Elokim chayim mipi Shmaya v'Avtalion. He wanted to hear the words of Shmaya v'Avtalion. Now they're saying Omru Oso Hayom Erev Shabbos Hayom. So they're saying this happened on a Friday afternoon. But Tukufas Teves Hayom, and it was like the month of Teves, the winter, very cold time. V'yorad alav sheleg min hashamayim, and he was there, and in the evening, snow fell on him. Kevan she'ola amot hashachar, when it became morning, Omar lo Shmaya la'Avtalion. Avtalion, Shmaya says to Avtalion, Avtalion, Achi, my brother, B'chol yom habayis meir. Usually in the morning it gets like much brighter in the Bet Midrash. There's like obviously like a skylight. I'm assuming like a type of a glass roof. I don't know if they had glass in that time. Hayom fell. Like, do you think today it's like a bit of weird, it's like a bit dark. Shema yom mu'unan. They thought, well, maybe it's a cloudy day. They sort of like concentrated a bit carefully. They focused their eyes. They saw there was the figure of a human being on the skylight. Olu umotsu olov rum shalosh amos sheleg. They found him covered with 3 cubits of snow. They took him out. They washed him, they smeared oil on him, and they sat him opposite a bonfire, remembering, of course, the story starts on Friday, Erev Shabbos, and they say, Ra'u zeh lechalel olav es haShabbos. It is fitting for us to break Shabbos, so to speak, in whatever way they didn't have to break Shabbos. I'm sure they didn't have Shabbos, but hopefully they didn't have to break Shabbos for him, to save him, because he was so interested and so focused on what was important to him. Hillel was a person who realized the value of learning every word from Shema and Avtalion. He didn't have the money. It doesn't say he went to go and get money to get food for his family. He didn't have the money. He couldn't go to the Bet Midrash. What did he do? He climbed onto the shelter, puts his ear to listen in, to not miss 1 minute. Because for Hillel, he had FOMO. He had fear of missing out, of learning Torah. Question is, what can we learn from the people in the Pesach Sheini story? They were people who didn't want to miss out on doing a mitzvah. They knew the value of a mitzvah. So the question I'd like to ask is, what is in our life that we have fear of missing out? Do we have fear of missing out of, I don't know what people are interested in, a magazine or a television program? And look what Hillel gave up his life. He could have died. He was hiding on top of a roof covered in snow because he was so interested not to miss out on learning Torah. And the people in the Pesach Sheini story, they didn't want to miss out on the opportunity of doing a mitzvah. What is it that we might want to miss out on or don't want to miss out on? I'm just going to pause there if anybody would like to say anything or make a comment or ask a question on something I said. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the practical significance today is only the minhagim, is eating matzah. Some people are very particular to eat matzah on Pesach Sheini. There is another opinion. The reason why we eat matzah on the 14th of Nisan is because, the 14th of Iyar is because the Bnei Israel, if you look in Shemos, Perek Tes Vov, Posuk Aleph, we know that's on the 15th of Iyar, and that is when the last the 15th of Iyar was the day that the Bnei Israel ran out of food after they left Egypt. So in inverted commas, on the 14th of Iyar was the last day they had the matzah that they took out with them from Egypt. So there's like a zecher to that. So people don't say tachanon and they don't say hespedim. It's minhagim. But even though we've got next Monday coming along, I would like people to think, if they eat their matzah or not, just about what is important. What is it in our own life that we try and chase? And what is it we're willing to try, even if stumbling blocks get in our way? What are we worried about missing out on? So for my nephew, it was serving in the army and he did everything he could. For the people in the Pesach Sheini story, it was, I don't want to miss out on offering up the Korban Pesach. I don't want to miss out on being Besoch B'nai Israel. I don't want to miss out on having that amazing opportunity and being part of B'nai Israel and remembering Hashem and the fact that he took us out of Egypt and being part of that story and remembering that story. Just before, there are other things to read, so I just want to say that the last source, if you want to read it in your own time, is actually the difference between Pesach Sheini and Pesach Rishon. For the people who keep Pesach Sheini, as I told you, one very big perk is that you don't have to clean your house from chometz, and Pesach Sheini is 1 day, whereas Pesach obviously is 7 days. There is another idea about Pesach Sheini, is that most mitzvahs, if you lose the opportunity to do that mitzvah for a korban, like if it's korban musaf in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, then if you didn't offer up on that day, it wasn't like you had the choice to do it the following day, the following day, the following day. Pesach Sheini is a bit unique in the sense that you missed the opportunity, but you have this opportunity 1 month later. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe said in one of his in his speeches, I think it was in 1952, says that Pesach Sheini represents a second chance, that a person should never despair, that we always have in our lives an opportunity for a second chance, that the world can only exist if people have the opportunity to do teshuvah. And it's a month later after Pesach, because the word chodesh is month, but it's also chadash, like every day we have a renewal. Lahis chadesh, every day is a renewal. Every day is a renewal. That we follow the lunar calendar, because the moon waxes and wanes every day. Sometimes, during the month it gets bigger and then it gets smaller. Every month we've got a renewed opportunity, another chance. And for that, I think it's so fascinating that the first idea of who these people were in the Pesach Sheini story is suggested that they were the people who were carrying the bones of Yosef. Yosef, out of all the characters in Tanakh, corresponds to a person for whom second chances are so important. He was taken by his brothers, sent on some ridiculous random mission. They put him in a pit. He didn't know who sold them to Egypt. He went to the house of Potiphar. He was in the dungeons for 2 years. He had no idea that this was all part of Hashem's plan. And after Yaakov died, the brothers were terribly worried that Yosef would cause them a lot of problems because he would hold a grudge against them. Yosef was the archetype of a person who was willing to give his own family members a second chance. He forgave his brothers unconditionally and said, this was Hashem's will. So Pesach Sheini, apart from being for us to think about ideas about what would we miss out on, what's important to us, and the value of a mitzvah and the value of not wanting to miss out on having an opportunity to do a mitzvah, even if we've got exemptions. For me, it's also about second chances. And it's an opportunity for us to think about how Yosef was willing to give his own brothers a second chance. And perhaps if there are any relationships that need to be repaired, we should never despair. We can repair our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The door to Teshuvah is always open. And I hope it's more meaningful for you on Monday.
Thank you, Chava. That was lovely.
Thank you so much, Chava. Very interesting.
Anybody's got any questions? I'm happy to stay on a bit.
I've got a comment. I've got a very nice comment. You can compare it to Abraham.
Yes.
Who also didn't want to give up on the mitzvah of Achnasas Orchim.
Lovely. You mean when he just had bris milah, which is really interesting.
He had every opportunity to say no.
Yeah.
Or even with Akedas Yitzchok, when he had every opportunity to say Hashem took the mitzvah away and Hashem had to replace it with a ram.
Thank you. Lovely. I like that idea. Yeah. Those ideas.
Chava.
Hi, it's Peter Bexenspanner. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make a comment, which I found very interesting, that I found from Rabbi Ari Khan. He says that the brothers took him, they wanted to throw Yosef out of Klal Yisrael because they sat down to eat when he was screaming in the pit. And so therefore the family was going to be split. And Yosef, eventually, when he forgave them, where did they pick him up? They picked him up in Shechem. And when they took him back to Eretz Yisrael, he said, bury me in Shechem, because that's where you picked me up. And Lamaisa, I found it very interesting that Yosef was so willing to change the course of history. And while the Yidden were coming in Mitzrayim, they were eating the Pesach, it had to be b'mishpacha, it had to be together. And to make the whole family together again. They wanted to throw him out of the family, but that's why he ended up going with them in the Midbar all the entire 40 years. So I loved your presentation. I told Mazmi, you're so organized, my goodness. He says, can you organize like that? I said, I don't know. We're not comparing. It was lovely. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for sharing the ideas. It's really, really, really amazing. It's an amazing idea that it is amazing that they did want to take him out. And when we had what Rebbetzin Bixenspanner was saying is that when Bnei Israel had to eat the Korban Pesach, you had to pre-allocate who you were eating with.
Right.
And so they wanted to break up the family. And he said,
Right.
no, I'm not breaking up family. Even though what you did to me, I'm not breaking up the family, which is why I think it's so incredible that the Gemara links the bones of Yosef. It's just like, why did they pick that? I don't know why Mishal and El Safon were stories written there. Maybe because of the timing. It was so near to the day that the Mishkan was dedicated. But Yosef's bones, it's such an important thing. And I love the idea about Shechem, bury me in Shechem. Drop me off where you pick me up. Where you drop me off.
Yeah. Very nice. And he's still in Shechem today. That's where the cave of Yosef is. for better or for worse, because there's always
Yeah.
Arabs lingering over there.
Well, we can still hope that Moshiach will come maybe before Monday. We can all offer up the Korban Pesach this coming Monday. Although I do think
Amen,
if
amen.
the whole nation's Tomei, we don't defer Pesach Sheini.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
It'll still be today. I'm available.
Listen, as long as they let us into the show today, that's pretty good.
Hashem can find ways, get us in, get us out. It's okay. Fine. Hashem will find ways. We have to have enough.
Absolutely.
We just hope that it's.
Amen. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Lovely to keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chava.
Thanks very much. Always a pleasure to listen to you. Thanks.
Hope it's not too complicated. It's quite technical today, but you've got the hands
No,
out.
it's fine.
Let's see. I can
Very
text
clear.
it to you.
The paperwork was very helpful. I prefer it with text. Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Yes, thank you
I don't
so
know why
much.
I don't know why my face is gone.
It was not too complicated, and it was very, very inspiring. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your support and taking the time to listen. Appreciate it.
Thank
Oh.
you. Thank you very much, Chava.
So
Given us
nicely.
Lots of food for
Always
thought.
so nicely, yeah.
And it was all very clear, wasn't complicated, as Judy said. It was quite easy to understand. I didn't have the handout, but it didn't matter because I could see it all so clearly on the screen. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks.